joining me now, is the author of that new book, Nobody is Coming to Save You, a Green Beret's Guide to Getting Big Stuff Done. Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann. What's up, Scott?
Hey, Will, you can't say it? You can't say what it is? You can't say what the big stuff
I can say it. It's the internet. A Green Beret's Guide to Getting Big Shit Done. I can say it. I don't, it's like, I don't want to be gratuitous.
No, I know.
I don't want to be a prude.
Yeah,
so
I went back and forth on it,
yeah.
man. I went back and forth on it, but you know what? I had so many NCOs and special forces over the year that would say it that way. Whenever we would go into places, we knew that stuff didn't really encapsulate the strategic nature of what had to get done in these rough places, And so I thought, well, let's just make it the title too.
Shit done. All right, I want to start here. A little bit of background. So I have known Scott. Scott's been a friend of this show and Fox and Friends. He's been on a lot. And I think for anybody who's a dedicated viewer or listener to the Will Cain Show has come across Scott before, not just because you've been a guest, Scott, but a little over a year ago now and I'm wearing this shirt. There's no coincidence today. I'm wearing a Lahaina Strong shirt.
Yeah.
A little bit over a year ago. First, I got to know Scott, I would say, largely through Pineapple Express. Okay, you came on Fox and Friends. You would talk about Pineapple Express, the operation that you and many vets put together, a lot of Green Berets, but others as well, to get Americans out of Afghanistan in the face of the failure of the American government with that withdrawal. And then when Lahaina burned, you and I connected, and I don't know, it was just moved to purpose. And we got to do something. And you took is part of your character, you took a leadership position. You put a group together. I contributed to that group. And we managed to pull off some pretty incredible feats in getting a 747 full of over $1 million of goods and other stuff delivered to Maui. So you and I not only have become friends through that process, but I think in a lot of ways we have, me to a smaller degree, obviously, you with your life now, experienced. Nobody's coming to save you. A Green Beret's Guide to Getting Shit Done. And I want to take that backstory, Scott, and I actually want to apply it to what's happening right now in America with the floods. I mean, it's horrible what's going on in North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee. It's really bad, and I know it touches you personally.
It does, and I appreciate you having me on, Will. And you're absolutely right, man. I mean, the way that we connected through, crisis has really stuck with me. And that's most of my relationships these days are people that I've met in the struggle, in the crisis. And what we did with Pineapple was absolutely what we put in place to do in Lahaina. And I have to say, there were a range of people that jumped into the fray. That's what made it so cool and never ceases to amaze me, Will, is the number of Americans, but the diversity of Americans from where they come from. And, the one thing about West Maui and the abandonment of our allies, nobody was talking about politics. Everybody was myopically focused on the purpose at hand because nobody was coming. And, I think what's happening right now with Hurricane Helene, whether that's in Florida or whether that's in Asheville, North Carolina, where all my folks are from, it is catastrophic, man. I tell you, I think what's going on in the Asheville area right now in Western North Carolina is apocalyptic. I think what's going to come out of there, I don't know that we're even ready for what's about to come out of there in terms of the scale and scope of the devastation. And it's because there's no commo in there, but it's not good, man. And we're going to need some kind of network-centric approach there, I believe, as well, and probably in other events as they follow.
Yeah, the latest I saw, Scott, is 100 dead, perhaps. And I learned in Maui, obviously, you think that's usually a conservative figure that gets worse. You got to be careful because sometimes also when there's guesswork, people fill in the gap. So who knows? Who knows? But I've seen the images.
Yeah.
I mean, I-40's down.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big thoroughfare. And that these towns in Western North Carolina are islands now. I mean, they're totally disconnected in so many ways. Not just physically, but as you pointed out, like no service, no power, no nothing.
No, and I was talking to one of my buddies who's a former case officer with the agency. His name's Matt, and his mother was stranded in there, and he hadn't heard from her. He hadn't heard anything from her. So, and they said, well, all the roads are down. You can't get in. So Matt, being Matt, he got an old school map, got his ham radio, got in his Jeep, and he external gas tanks, and he picked his way through the Appalachian Mountains, and he got his mom, and he got her out of there. But what he saw on the way, and what he's talked to me about, Will, and what I'm hearing from others is absolute devastation. But I think the good news in all of that, if there is any, is the way that people are leveraging relationships and human connection to get through it. And I think that's what happened with Lahaina. I think it's what happened with pineapple. And frankly, I think it's the last best shot we got in this country, man. I think it's the last best shot we have at reclaiming our country, reclaiming our collective agency, and who we are as Americans. It is this kind of bottom-up grassroots leadership. Because if we're waiting for institutional leaders to handle it, we're deluded.
Yeah, you've talked a lot about that. So yesterday I was kind of scrolling through my feed too much, as we all do, and I saw these helicopters, and I tweeted this out, but like I saw these helicopters taking off, over there somewhere. I guess it's in Carolina, could have been South Carolina, Tennessee, I don't know. And it was just sort of like a civilian Air Force, taking off, trying to get supplies in, back and forth. I'll never forget once I got over to Maui, the things that neighbors did for one another.
Right.
Like you had a Navy basically shipping supplies from one island to another. I met two Mormon girls, and people always get on me, and they're right to do that. They're in their 20s, but they were young women who just started this logistical airlift of bringing stuff from one side of the island to the other into this little airport. And the biggest takeaway, you can focus, and it deserves attention, like institutions will fail you. But in the end, your biggest social safety net is your neighbor. It's your fellow American. And I know you believe that. And I want to let you talk on that. You and I texted yesterday, and I was like, I want to be a resource. What can I do? And we haven't followed up with each other yet. But like, I think for a lot of people listening, like, okay, unless it is my neighbor, unless it is my town, what can I do?
That's a great question, and I know we will follow up on it because I think there is actually work. And look, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that we don't need institutions. In a first world country of abundance, you need institutions. They can do things that only institutions can do. What I'm saying is that a lot of these institutions are failing us, right? Whether that was in how we treated our allies and how we left Afghanistan, whether that is in disaster response. There's a lot of heroes out there in the institutions doing the work, but at a leadership level, slow to the punch, hand-wringing kind of things where networks can fill the gap. And where I'm going with that, Will, and I talk a lot about this in the book, is that throughout our history, actually, and especially in the early 1900s, the country was in a very close place to where it is right now. It was like a downswing of trust, political division, haves and have-nots, and most pundits were saying that America was on her last leg, and this was in the early 1900s. And then a couple of drunks in Akron, Ohio, Dr. Bob and Bill W. couldn't get sober, and they had a meeting, and they called it Alcoholics Anonymous. Around the same time in Chicago, the Rotary Club was formed, the Junior League, the NAACP, the Elks Club. All of the clubs and social organizations that you and I grew up with as kids were actually formed in about a 10-year period in the darkest period of American history. That was before we had the kind of technology that you and I used on Signal to work with others across the country, and if not the world, on helping Lahaina. And so where I'm going with this is we've been here before. There's actually a macro precedent for America reclaiming its agency through bottom-up grassroots movements using old school interpersonal skills and relationships that were built when risk was low and cashed in when the stakes are high. And I think that's what we've got to get back to. We've got to get conscious of it, intentional about it. And I think if we do that, it starts to create a movement across the country that, if nothing else, will shame our institutional leaders into doing the right thing or put the pressure on them to step up.
So you said two things there. Before I get more into the book, you talked about agency. That's the thing. Like, I think for so many people listening and watching, so we talk often about the lack of purpose in young men and then therefore the rise of depression and things like this. And I think that's a direct product of letting the world scroll by, and our main contribution being to that, something we pound out with our thumbs as a performance, largely.
Yes.
And there's so much purpose and fulfillment in agency, meaning I took action. I did something, right?
Yes.
Not just tweet something. I am more proud of what we did a year ago in Maui than probably anything I've ever said on television, obviously, right? Or any big stand I've taken, no matter how brave. Or how against the grain on ESPN, because it was agency. And there's different personality types, Scott. And, I know that for me, I am happier when in control, even with failure. Like, failure is not what bothers me.
Right.
A lack of control is what bothers me.
Right.
And I just think that for everybody listening and watching, part of what you're telling us is also the path to fulfillment, like a real life of purpose.
100%, man, because, one of the things in the book that I hit really hard is what I call the human operating system. And this is something that I've taught for years to young Green Berets and federal law enforcement agents that have to go into really tough arenas, is that we have to understand this instrument that is the human operating system. And it's a very primal instrument. It's been around for hundreds of thousands of years, and it really hasn't changed. We're well-dressed Neanderthals in how we navigate the world, even though technology is swirling all around us. And you know what's at the heart of that? Is meaning. We are meaning-seeking, meaning-assigning creatures. The brain actually has a mandate, according to Dr. Ivan Tyrrell, to make sense of the world. It has a mandate to make sense, to add meaning to what's going on. So we ignore that at our peril. And I think when you see, like you just said, when you see the levels of disengagement that are happening in the corporate workspace, in our communities, it's an absence of purpose. And that's a leadership problem, right? That's a leadership problem, that absence, but it's also an agency problem. People are not applying agency in their own life. And you're absolutely right. That's why Lahaina, I think pineapple, and these other things resonate so deeply with Americans, because they see Americans just stepping up and trying to do something. Look, I mean, we left tens of thousands of commandos behind. Like, I get texts from them, I get videos from them that they've lost their father. They was executed. And you just think, my God, like, we failed. But you know what? At least we tried. At least we did something meaningful. And I think today people are they're just starving for that. They're starving for leaders who will just step into the arena and give it a shot, man, because most institutional leaders are too busy with self-preservation. So that element of meaning in this digital world, like, it is strategic. In what it's rocket fuel for what we do.
A lot of the stuff you're telling us, just for the record, is Scott is referencing our human operating system and the way we live in a distracted world. A lot of this is laid out in Nobody Is Coming to Save You. It really is. He talks about how much of us is above the waterline versus below the waterline, meaning we're glaciers. You ever see a glacier? Whatever you see is like 20% of what you see. The rest is under the water, and that's all what makes us up. And but before. So there was one other thing that you had talked about on this front of agency, because I almost imagine myself talking to someone right now. I'm talking to you, Scott, but I'm also talking to people listening. And I know there's a lot of women that listen to this show, and I love them and appreciate that, because I actually interact with a lot of them for some reason. But I also know there's a lot of dudes, and a lot of dudes whose operating systems, how about this way, are set very similar to mine. And I almost feel like this part, it's not just for the men, it's for everybody, but I can almost hear them responding to me how, like, or that's, like, take what's happening in North Carolina. I mean, like, that's, for many listening, that's far away. And, like, even for me, Scott, I'm struggling with the how right now. Yeah. But this ties into your Green Beret experience now and what you said. What I learned, again, through my limited experience and your extensive experience, is we can't answer that question right now, and you don't have to. It's about jumping into the chaos. And this is the Green Beret side of you. This is what you did in Afghanistan. This is the story of you dropping into a village. Like, there's a lot of planning and some attempts to answer that, but it truly starts to come together in the action, right? Like, you can't map it all out and game plan it. It's not until, in some cases, in your case, the bullets are flying, but in others, you're just getting done that you figure out the how.
100%. And, I think back, like, when I was a young Green Beret and those Green Berets. So, our charter is to go into rough, trust-depleted places and build connections with locals and then help them stand up on their own. So to go in with 12 and come out, with 1,200. I tell people a Green Beret these days is a combination of John Wick, Lawrence of Arabia, and the Verizon guy. This eclectic combination of those three avatars. And I think about, like, one of my former sergeant majors, this guy Bill Sarnowski. I think he's probably listening. He loves your show. And there was occasions where I would be worried about what was coming our way, what the threats were, what the attacks were going to be, and he'd say, "Hey, sir, ain't nobody coming. It's us. Whatever we've got, that's what we're going to have to. We're just going to have to figure it out as we go." And I think about when we contacted around Lahaina, one of the first things you said to me was, "Scott, I'm not really sure that I'm even relevant to this. I'll jump in and I'll give it a try, but I'm not even sure how I can play a position here." And I think what I said to you was something to the effect of, "You'll know when it's time for you to step in. Just get in the network and start mixing it up. And we did an introduction. We got into the signal room, and there were all these eclectic people in there. And then at some point, man, it flicked for you, and you knew exactly what you needed to do. And what you noticed, I think, was that a lot of the other people simply stepped back because you were most relevant to the problem at that moment. And that's the key of leadership that I see today, that you see happening in Asheville, you see happening in other places, is these leaders in the arena that they step in. Once you get in there and you build connections and relationship and trust, and you start sticking and moving with myopic focus on the problem, you hit a state of flow. And you know when to step in, you know when to step back, and that becomes the real power of that collective effort. And it's something that I think we're right on the edge of it right now. I really believe it. I think we're right on the edge of it in this country. And I'm encouraged by it. That's why I put the book out. Is you don't deploy your reserves when you're losing the fight. You deploy your reserves when you're about to win the fight. And I think that's exactly where we are. And it's why I decided to put the book out right now, because I think it is a supplement to helping do that, to make those connections and do what scares the hell out of you, because that's what's needed.
Well, you just did this again. You just referenced something that is a deep. Every one of these things you're saying, by the way, are a deeper well. They're a deeper well for me of curiosity of your life experience, and they're a deeper well of explanation in Nobody's Coming to Save You. But like the relationship side, right? Scott, that's actually been a difficult thing in my life. Not that I have trouble making relationships. That I guess. There was a formation of me in my life where it's like, I don't want to rely on the concept of networking, that somehow networking felt like cheating to me, and it's like, I want to do it on my own. And life has taught me that is so wrong. Now, I appreciate the Sigma. There's the Alpha, and all the kids today love the Sigma, the lone wolf version of the Alpha, right? My kids reference it. But the truth is, you don't get things done on a grand scale alone. You just don't. And so relationships... once the signal room for Lahaina, whatever, like you said, I think it ended up, it's probably 50 to 100 people contributing at some level, probably a core 20 who are really thoroughly getting in there. And I didn't know, one of them, but for you dropping in, and those relationships are what make everything happen. And you said something really smart in the book. You're like, you just have to collect these relationships.
Right.
And it's not about like, this ugly, like thinking of relationships as transactional. We're talking about the path to meaning here. And therefore, the path to action and meaning is through relationships.
Yes, and that's really well stated. And what I want to try to get across to people is this is not kumbaya stuff. Like, I'm not coming at this from some kind of theoretical point of view of wouldn't it be nice. I mean, these were the things I learned in the most dangerous places on earth, where the casualty count was enormous, right? And you were going into these places where the elder across from you is tickling the trigger of his AK-47, trying to figure out whether he's going to dispatch you or not. And you've got a couple of minutes to make some kind of move. Now, you can either reach for your weapon, or you can threaten that guy, or you can make a human connection. And what I found hanging out with some of the most iconic Green Berets on the planet was that they would make a connection almost every time, and that they would move with immense skill to make this connection. And the reason was because within a couple of months, that same elder would be up on his rooftop slinging lead right there beside him. Not because he had to do it, but because he chose to do it. And at the end of the day, the primal reality of humans, particularly in a crisis and when we're scared and when we're afraid, forget all that crap you see in the movies, it is the man and woman to your shoulder, to your left, and to your right that will determine whether you live or die in the moment. It has nothing to do with you, almost nothing. It has to do with the relationships that you built when trust was low and that you've leveraged when the stakes are high. And that's just the way it is. And whether it's a wildfire or whether it's a terrorist attack or a mudslide or an economic or a COVID. I mean, the reality is we are social creatures. We don't have fur, fangs, or claws, but we sit on top of the food chain because we form teams better than any other mammal. And the humans that get that and make social capital their relationship portfolio, their weight of effort, they're the ones that are going to be more relevant, especially in hard times. That's been my experience.
What do you think that is? That's so fascinating what you referenced about the Elks and the Rotary and all that. And this is such a big question, Scott, and something I've talked about, and I think it might even be your life's purpose going forward. But how do you envision that? Is there no need to reinvent the wheel? Is it like local communities more invested in things like Elks or whatever? I don't know anybody that belongs to that anymore, right? But like,
Exactly.
it's true. You have to start local. Again, something you write about in the book. But how do you envision that? Like, what's an actionable plan?
Well, I think the first thing is we need to reacquaint ourselves with the civil society we already have. Like that's, when Alexander de Tocqueville visited the United States, over 100 years ago, he went back to Europe and he said, the amazing thing about America is they have a sense of individualism that's rightly understood. Right? We already have a civil society that allows us to get beyond our primal tendencies of clan and tribe and group, which, by the way, are great if you're in the right clan or tribe, but not so great if you're not. It's not. You look at some of these countries like Afghanistan, where literally engulfed in tribal warfare. We live in a society where we trust each other in a bridging kind of way. We actually bridge beyond our in-groups and our out-groups. There is a level of social capital that is our secret sauce. It's what has allowed us to be who we are in the world and navigate the world that we do and have, frankly, the levels of abundance that we have. Typically, humans don't live in abundance. We live in scarcity. And if you don't believe me, go to some of these places where people are siphoning gas out of each other's gas tanks right now. That's what we resort to very quickly. But yet there is in this society this level of abundance and the ability to chase one's dreams. And it's because we have a level of social capital that typically leaders are the stewards of. I think it was Jonathan Haidt that says, high-performing societies have psychological safety, they have trust in their neighbors, and they have institutions they can believe in. And we're failing dismally in all those. So my vision is that, first of all, we have a constitution that works really well. It empowers the individual, and I think we need to get back to that and aspire to be what's in it. But also, as communities and as humans, we need to look around at all the systemic problems that we have and stop this language of, somebody ought to do something about that. Well, step in the arena and do it and build a community of practice, which is what I talk about in my book. It's what we did with the play Last Out. Never written a play in my life, never acted in my life, and stepped off on a midlife crisis to learn how to act at age 50. And we got a play together that was produced by Gary Sinise, right? And so we've done it. I've seen it done over and over again. You've done it, Will. We'll probably do something like that with Western North Carolina. Look at that piece of stinking cheese that's over in the corner that nobody's picking up and step in there and deal with it and build a network around it and just use your innate God-given skills to lead. And I think this book has a lot of the best practices to help you do that and to train on it. Train on your storytelling, train on your active listening, train on getting clear on your purpose and your meaning before the crisis occurs, and then leverage it when it happens.
Okay, I want to ask you about two things. One applies to your life experience, but the other applies to what you're exactly talking about. And you were just talking about tribes. So J.D. Vance, obviously the vice presidential candidate along with Donald Trump, was asked about illegal immigration, Scott. And he was asked, I think the question specifically is, what should a Christian approach be to illegal immigration? And he brought up a deeper topic that I personally find fascinating that touches on our conversation. I want you to listen to this from J.D. Vance.
Okay.
My first responsibility is to America's citizens. And I think there is this Christian idea that you owe the strongest duty to your family, and then you owe the next duty to your community, and then to your country, and then to everybody else. So it doesn't mean that you have to be mean to other people, but it means that your first duty as an American leader is to the people of your own country.
So I found that fascinating, Scott. Now, you were talking about tribalism. And you've got to return there in New York. This is back in the studios here in Dallas. I always have found this fascinating. This is the concentric circles of I guess, focus for empathy and priority. And what I have on my screen here for those listening instead of watching is this. The screen here on my left is conservative, and closer to the bullseye is closer to home. It's all of your family, then your extended family, then your closest friends, then all of your friends, then your acquaintances, and on and on and on and on until you get to your community, and then those very far away. And so for those on the right, it shows that their heat map is very much centered on 1, 2, 3, 4. Those closest to them are their priority. Those on the left, the center of their bullseye, the hottest of their concern level, is up around 13, 14, 15, which on the legend here, it says, all animals in the universe, including alien life forms, all living things in the universe, including plants and trees, and so on. more focus and empathy on that than their family. And what I have made the argument, Scott, is this is inverted. Like this, now you talked about tribes, and I think that does play a role, but like if we're talking about how we lead and where we give our focus, I think forget politics for a minute. Which one is labeled, which one is considered liberal, conservative. It should look like this. It should be that closest to you is most important to you.
Individualism, rightly understood, right? And I think that in this case, what we're talking about contextually is that we have to pay attention because not all tribalism is bad. You know, that's the other thing that I've always I taught at Fort Bragg and other places is you have this notion that tribalism is bad. That's not true. I mean, Appalachia has high degrees of tribalism, rural areas. We all come from tribes and clans and in groups. That's how we survive. All mammals do that, and certainly humans do that. But what we have to understand is that in a society of abundance, right, where you have enough. Most places in the world operate on scarcity, and so the only way you can survive is your in-group. The only way you can survive is your in-group, and that's it. You acquire and you preserve resources with your tribe, your family, your clan, whatever. In a society of abundance, it goes beyond your in-group. Your trust goes beyond your in-group, but you must always preserve the core level of your social capital. If you abandon that, then you abandon your entire foundation to establish trust at the outer edges, right? It cannot sustain itself. You are in complete violation of our biology, of how we're actually wired to navigate the world. It makes no sense in terms of even just pure survival. It doesn't work, right? You have to preserve the core elements of your social capital at the innermost level. And then from there, you bridge outward. That's the key.
Right. You write about this. You start local. And again, and nobody's coming to save you. You have to address things at the local level and then build from there. Last thing, because it's in the news, Scott, I mean, former Green Beret helped develop the village stability philosophy operations of dealing with tribes in Afghanistan. We're sitting here today. It looks like in an incredible military operation, Israel has taken out the tops of Hezbollah. I mean, people are talking. By the way, as a Green Beret, I'm actually just fascinated by your perspective on that. Blowing up the pagers, 15 years it took, but that was the opening salvo, Scott. Now we've seen the top leaders taken out by a missile strike, and now we have special forces or operations into Lebanon and tanks lined up at the border. What do you think? What are we on the verge of here in the Middle East?
Well, let's just unpack it. We are on the verge, I think, of what could be a major ground campaign in Lebanon. Now, what does that mean? Let's just pull apart what that means at face value. And we'll talk Israel and Hezbollah in just a second, and Iran. But in terms of what we should be paying attention to on this is, number one, this is probably going to cause a massive humanitarian issue in Lebanon. We are looking at, I've got buddies, we're all the volunteer groups, not just Pineapple, others are looking at this going, okay, is this going to be another network-centric effort where veterans fill the gaps here? And I think it will. I know Project Dynamo is already putting out, hey, if you need rescue, sign up here. And that always tells me, and they've already been on the ground. There's other operators on the ground I've been talking to that are in Lebanon now, and they're saying is maybe 30 to 50,000 American citizens caught up in this in Lebanon that would have to be evacuated because there's really nowhere to go. So we're looking at a major non-combatant evacuation, I think. We're looking at humanitarian displacement. That's one thing. Then when you look at the operation itself, I am really impressed always with how Israel conducts operations and how they've conducted themselves post-October 7. I mean, look, starting with the pagers and then the radios. I mean, you talk about tactical and strategic patience and surgical targeting, and then to follow it with the hit with the bunker buster on Nasrallah. And now that you've taken out the entire command and control structure at the top, you have a limited window of time where they are in complete disarray. They'll fill the leadership gap. They always do. All these groups do. But right now, they are in turmoil, and so Israel has immediately pressed the gas. They have pressed the fight, and while they are while the head of the snake and the snake is writhing around, they're hitting the tunnels. and they're not missing a beat. So everything that I've seen them do, from their psychological warfare to their messaging to their surgical targeting, has been some of the most impressive stuff I've ever seen. And the last thing I'll say on it is I hope we're paying attention, because if we think that Iran, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, ISIS are not going to pursue some level of reciprocity at a much higher level, and maybe we can talk about this some other time, on the home front here, I think we're missing something really dangerous.
I've quoted you. You were on Fox and Friends and said the people you've talked to have said that it's not just the warning board is not just lighting up, it's smoking in terms of, our southern border, what their plans are, what they want to do here, and what they increasingly might have the capacity to do here. But instead of that, I want to ask you, what will Iran do in response? Because that means that's going to dictate the extent to which there is a wider war in the Middle East, which could suck in the United States then.
I hate to say it depends, Will, but it kind of does. I mean, Iran has spent a lot of time cultivating Hezbollah as a surrogate force, and they are right now in danger of losing them. And Iran just doesn't have the capacity to fight a unilateral fight. I mean, they have a little bit, they have their own problems in their borders. They rely on these surrogates. They rely on Hamas. They rely on Hezbollah. And so will they commit Hezbollah to an open war of a movement, conventional defense against the IDF? I don't know. I tend to think they won't. I think they'll cut their losses and pull back. But maybe they'll say, okay, this is our time. We're going to go for it. But I honestly think what you'll probably see Iran do is pull back, because they've just been decimated. I don't see any move they can make here.
All right. So listen, sometimes when I do this show, I don't know. The guys in New York, and I'm about to have a big college football debate with these guys because they're incredibly wrong. But they know, I guess I get a little fatigued on, okay, I don't want to do the same stuff every day. I don't want to just complain. And this conversation is obviously an exception, but what's more important beyond the conversation is that, Scott, you have been a conduit for me of not just talking, but doing. And I want that to be increasingly a part of my life. I don't want to just talk into microphones.
Yeah.
I don't find it the same level of fulfillment. And I think if you're listening, I think you might find the same thing, And I do think, and he intends it to be a guidebook, and I think it can be a guidebook or a springboard or inspiration for you if you want to do something, right? If you want to get big shit done, because here's a Green Berets guide. Nobody is coming to save you. It's great, Scott, and I appreciate the book, and I appreciate our relationship. Appreciate you.
Thank you,
Lieutenant
brother.
Colonel
I
Scott,
appreciate it, man, and I look forward to what we do together, and I hope everybody gets out there and gets after it.
Me too. Can't wait.